Hi guys, my name is Girish Bali, the host for Back to Basics. Today I have a guest. I'm a little excited about this. Now, we're talking about Hindu mythology. Now, I know it's a very, very boring topic, but then you know what? This person, this author, has made it more, I should say, more creative to be more enjoyable and more interesting on the stories. And will tell you who the audience that she has actually resonated with. We're going to talk to you about that in basics, but I don't want to tell anything else. But keep this in mind. I'm going to read this, what I wrote down. Myths aren't a fairy tale or a legend. They're an honest attempt to explain mysteries of different stories. Now, mythology is not a lie. Mythology is a poetry of how to express. Now, that's what we're trying to do here in this show. Bhakti, thank you for coming on my show, and thanks for coming on my show for Back to Basics.
Hi, Girish. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the first things first, before we get into the basics of the topics and discussion today, what does Back to Basic mean to you?
Well, that's a good question. I think for me, back to basics is being myself,
Hmm.
is having integrity, and being honest and being simple.
Yeah. Sometimes we tend to forget that, simplicity is kind of needed in this world, not because the times we're going through, but I think it should have been like this forever, but it looks like we make it so complicated we forget. Am I right?
Yes, I think as human beings, we have this great capability of making things more complicated than they need to be.
Yeah.
And it's fairly simple to keep things simple, but I think we forget that.
Yeah, yeah. So Bhakti, thank you for coming on my show to make this brighter for both of us and for actually for me, especially for me. So the reason why I brought you on this show is I saw your work and I saw the books that you came up with, okay? And let me give you some few examples of some titles and images up here, and there are many more. There's definitely many more, and I've only picked 3, okay? Um it's actually audience is your kids or kids in general. Is that correct?
So, well, yes and no. I mean, I started these books for my kids when they were quite young. They were 3 and 1 years old, and Holi was around the corner.
Hmm.
The Indian Festival of Colors, and I wanted to get a book for my older one
Hmm.
to tell him how the festival is celebrated.
Hmm.
And I couldn't really find anything that I liked. So I had this eureka moment where I said, I want to write a book. And I was sitting with my husband, and he said, just do it. And it sounded like a Nike ad at that time, but, it really gave me the impetus to start. And so that's how it started.
Hmm.
But, obviously, a 3-year-old is not going to buy a book
Of course not.
or 2-year-olds. So the purchasers are parents and grandparents,
Hmm.
and uncles and aunts. And, the feedback, and I've been very fortunate to get fantastic feedback. And the feedback that most parents give me is that these books have sort of brought them in touch with the stories that they grew up hearing from their parents and grandparents. And as you know, in India, there's such a huge tradition of oral storytelling.
Yes.
There's over the years, because of nuclear families, both parents working, it's somewhere gotten lost.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to hear when parents say that it's brought them those memories back, and they're using these books to tell their kids about these festivals.
Hmm.
So it's very heartening to hear that I've somewhere been able to create a special moment between a parent and a child.
So Bhakti, thank you for that. So is it fair to say what I said in the beginning of the show is that mythology is more of a fairy tale versus a history? Is that fair to say that?
For me, when I look at mythology, I mean, there are two parts to it. So, one is if you take our epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata,
Yes.
I think there's a lot of history because the authors who wrote it, for them to have written that, of course, they had a very creative mind,
Hmm.
but there also must have been a thriving civilization at that point of time where these things were happening. So, for example, in Mahabharata, two sets of families fighting over property,
Yes.
creating a war, there being greeds. So, I'm sure these were all present, and that we all know that our civilization goes back thousands and thousands of years.
Sure.
So I certainly think there's an element of history,
Hmm.
and there's also certainly an element of imagination, which is a fairy tale bit.
Yeah.
So I think I'd say it's a combination of both.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Bhakti, now, I want to tell a small story if you don't mind. So it's a very small
Of
one.
course.
So many years ago, many moons ago, I was telling my wife was telling a story to my son about a mythology story, whatever the story it was. I don't remember the book, but I do remember the incident. Okay. So she was explaining about a girl and a boy and a lady and a man about something. You know, she actually asked a question to my son saying, "Do you understand the story?" And you know what his answer was? His answer was, "Why is the girl not wearing slippers?" Do you understand what I'm saying? So the kids nowadays, it looks like they're more visual versus an actual story. You think this is the process of how you came up with this concept? More visual than versus a story itself?
That's a good question. So my kids were, as I said, they were quite young, 3 and 1. And for me, it was very important to tell the story the way I wanted to. But more importantly, I wanted the worlds to be depicted by this visual imagery which would excite them. Because, a 2 or 3 year old, most of them, they can't even read probably. So what
That's
would
right.
attract them first would be colors, pictures. And through that, hopefully they'd ask the parents questions or it'll become easier for the parents to narrate the stories. So I was very lucky to find a fabulous illustrator who's worked with me now on 13 books, which the series has, the Amma Tell Me series.
Mm-hmm.
And her name is Molchi Somani.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time that I met her, almost a decade back, she had just left Walt Disney. She used to work with them.
Okay.
And she had branched out on her own. So I've been very fortunate that she's really been able to understand what I wanted to portray, and I think she's been able to really express my words in colors. And you are right. I think it's very important for children to be excited by pictures because that's what they understand first.
Yeah.
In the age group of sort of, let's say, 2 to 6 or 2 to 8, and of course, as they become middle graders, then the story entices them, and they think children's books are for picture books are for kids, and they feel all grown up.
Right.
But for this age group, for sure, it's
Yeah.
illustrations.
So back in maybe I don't know how many years ago, but there was a comic which I found, okay, regarding mythology in a different way, in a twisted way. It was by Deepak Chopra and Shekhar Kapoor. It was a comic called Virgin Comics. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
Oh,
if you Google it, I have bought almost all of the comics because it resonated with me in a many different way. I mean, it showed Shiva as not as a god, but as a person, as a warrior. Sita as not as a princess or whatever, but more as a warrior. You know, those type of things, and it made it into a comic book, like a Superman comic book or a Batman comic book. Uh, so that was very cool from my point of view, as a teenager point of view. And then this one here, now you're, roping in like little kids to make that understand. So I think it's very creative the way you did that, and I thank you for that creativity.
thank
Um,
you.
yeah. So what's next for you? Because it seems like you've done so much, and I'm looking on your website, and sorry, I'm not looking at you, but there's
That's
one
fine.
there's one here which obviously Holi's one, Diwali's one, Ramayan's one, Krishna's one, and how Krishna fought the demon. There are many small stories. Do you? How far is too far for you?
So yeah, as you're probably aware, we have 200 million gods and goddesses in
That's
India.
right.
So I have a good problem. I'm never going to run out of topics. So right now the series has 13 books, and as you said, they're on the major festivals, and then I have a trilogy on Krishna and on Hanuman, who's my favorite god. So I have just started the 10 avatars of Vishnu right now.
Hmm.
So I'm working on that. So I don't have a number in mind for the series. It's really, what I want to tell my children. They're much older now.
Yeah.
but still the main driving force. And I started another series in 2017. That's about 4 years back with Penguin, which is for middle school, middle grade, about 9 to 13-year-olds, and that's called Amma Take Me, which is a travelogue of a mother and her kids as she travels to different places in India. And the idea is to explain the different religions and faiths that we have through their places of worship, through
Yeah.
the monument.
Yeah.
Uh, so I travel with my husband and my kids, and the books are based on the questions that my kids actually asked me.
Yeah.
So there's a book on the Golden Temple, on Shirdi, on Tirupati, on the Dargah of Salim Chishti, and Taj Mahal is coming next. So this was a very exciting project because I hadn't been to many of these places,
Sure.
and it's fascinating what my children are. So this is another series which is continuing,
So
and we'll see where it goes. But it's been a great learning experience.
yeah, so I'm gonna get to that question, but I want to tell my viewers and my listeners about something here. So, guys, you have to understand, mythology is a Hindu mythology that we're talking about here. Now, there might be other mythologies that maybe we never really tapped into, and this is what we did. We're tapping into a Hindu mythology. Now, the world is so big, but yet is so small. We need to understand each and every culture around us. You know, the word that we use at the workplace is called diversity. Well, we're trying to use our diversity in a fun way, and that's what Bhakti did. We're trying to diversify the whole world and make it fun. Why not make it one a fun and simple? And that's what we're trying to do on this back to basics here. So Bhakti, so is it really that complicated to explain to people about mythology? Because a lot of people, they say, you know what, this god has eight arms and 10 heads, and how do you explain to them that it's not really a physical the physical thing? It's actually more of that they have a knowledge of 10 heads, or strength of 10 arms or 8 arms. How do we explain that? Is that what you're trying to do, to explain and make awareness to people?
So my aim was really to share with my kids the stories that I grew up hearing. It wasn't so much to explain it in a particular way. So when I grew up, or when you grew up, there was no iPad, there was no iPhone.
That's right.
My mother used to work, so when I would come back home, I had a nanny who used to take care of me, and he was a male. His name was Bhagwan, very aptly, and he would tell me stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata every day.
Yeah.
So imagine having a 2-hour storytelling session and hearing about kings and queens and sort of the most evil of adversaries. And I think that's where my love of mythology came from. So when I wanted to share these stories with my kids, that was the main motivation of sharing the stories that excited me so much when I was growing up and took me to a different place.
Hmm.
And over the years, I realized that mythology is also a great parenting tool. And to elaborate on this, so if I tell my kids that be good, if you do this, if you're not good, the consequence is this, if you behave in a certain way, I always find that they think I'm preaching to them and they have no interest in listening to me.
Hmm.
But if I can show them a character
Hmm.
from mythology, and this could be any mythology,
Sure.
because a good story is a good story, regardless of where it's from. But if I can show them a character like Krishna or Hanuman, or Krishna was naughty, he used to lie to his mother, he used to steal butter, he used to flirt with the women. But if I show them a story and tell them what he behaved and what happened, then they get it. And it's the same with Hanuman, I find. So I find these two characters very popular with kids.
Hmm.
Hanuman was also naughty as a child, but he grew up to be such a great friend, so devoted, strong. He used to exercise, he used to work out, he was very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So there are many such stories which really show instead of telling.
Hmm.
So I find that kids understand concepts, values of love, compassion through these stories much easier than kind of being preachy. So my first aim was to tell the stories in a way that would engage children
Yeah.
and in a very non-preachy way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was really the idea.
So Bhakti, I mean, you've been brought up in the Hindu family, right? And you have been grown up by what your mom and your dad and your elders have mentioned, right? But then sometimes obviously there's like a lie of how they give you stories. Did you do much of a research of these stories?
So, luckily, there is a lot of research available and there's a lot of actual text.
Yeah.
So, if I look at, for example, Krishna, there is the entire Bhagavatam which has been written, which has been translated. Same for Hanuman, there is a Ramcharitmanas
Yes.
written by Tulsidas. So I actually went back to the source
Yeah.
to study them.
Yeah.
And so that is a benefit. And of course, in a lot of the books, I put in stories that my mother or my grandmother would tell us. So, for example, every Diwali, my grandmom would tell us a story about how Lakshmi visits Earth, and one year she decided to go back because she thought people had become too greedy, and what were the consequences of that.
Mm.
So it's a mixture of what I grew up hearing and going back to the actual text.
Yeah.
And that was, for me, that was my favorite part. Research was my favorite part. And then in the Amma Take Me series, which is on the places, there is so much research on, for example, Golden Temple, the Sikh history,
Yeah.
or on Shirdi,
Mm.
or on Dargah of Salim Chishti. There's so much written about the Mughal history.
Yeah.
So I think my problem was too much information
Okay.
available,
Okay. Okay.
which I then had to kind of see and, yeah, put it across in my own way.
So the other question that I had is that, let's say you came up with all these books, and you did, right? There are other authors which, when they come up with these mythology stories, sometimes they kind of get in trouble. So because other people, they have different views of that story. Aren't you afraid that people will come back to you and give you negative feedback on that?
No, actually, I never thought of it like that, and I've got a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
No, that actually never bothered me.
Okay.
Somehow, no, it was really a labor of love for my
Yeah.
children, and I was telling the story the way I wanted to.
Yeah.
So, but that's an interesting point you make.
Because you know
But
what?
so far,
So I'll give you an example. So there was
yeah.
obviously, Amish Tripathi, right?
Yes,
He
the
has
Shiva
the
trilogy.
Shiva trilogy, and it seems like there's a big hoopla about his book in the beginning. Now people are understanding what he's trying to do. But in the beginning, it was a big hoopla as how he kind of diverted Shiva into a warrior, and he's a simple person, and
Mm.
he's a basic human being, and people didn't resonate with that. So I think maybe the thought process, and or I should say the key word is mindset, right? How do we change the mindset of people to explain that, you know what, these were people also, and these are fairy tales, and not take it seriously? Is that the right approach, you think?
I think Amish Tripathi's books have become very popular, and a lot of authors have written along the veins that you're talking about. And I think it probably takes time for people to understand. And maybe
Exactly.
his books were one of the books that came out earlier.
That's right.
But yeah, I think that's how we widen our horizons. And at the end of the day, this is an author's interpretation. And I think
That's right.
as long as authors are sensitive,
Yeah.
I think authors should have the freedom
Yeah.
to portray characters in the way they see them. I
Yeah.
mean, that is originality, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Because I mean, in his one of his interviews, he mentioned this one line, and this one line has stuck in my mind forever. Shiva is the cool of the dudes of the dudes. You know, so he's
He is a very cool dude.
yeah. So I mean, when you explain that to people, it's nothing wrong with it, and it's not negative.
But not at all. And finally, children get it because the way I explain Shiva is very similar. So I have a book, Amma Tell Me About Ganesha, and in that I always say that his parents are Shiva and Parvati. And every reading I've done, I say that Shiva was this weird. He was kind of a bit of a weird fellow, and
Yeah.
the kids start laughing.
Yeah.
But he was a bit weird because he was married and he would leave Parvati and he would go off in the forest for days and days to meditate. So that was upsetting for her. And when I say this to kids that he was a bit weird, they all get it.
Yeah.
They all understand.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes kids get things that adults miss.
Yeah.
And maybe because they're already in the back to basic mode, they're simple,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
So, do you think the way we are explaining to kids, or the way we're telling stories, from maybe Amish, or maybe you, and maybe Deepak Chopra and every other authors out there and speakers out there. Do you think we're doing like a reboot of a mythology telling stories to make it more
I
visual, maybe?
I don't know if I would call it a reboot, but from what you tell me and from what I'm seeing, I think there are attempts being made by authors or by people to portray things the way they see it,
That's right.
and they're being true to themselves
Yeah.
in the way they are explaining things. And I think that is really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like there's a different way, a different prote of how to tell a story, and I think that's what people are trying to do. Um, like I'm trying to tell a story in my show, and people are liking the way it is. So, so what is for the next 5 years? I know you explained that you have a whole bunch of series going on, but what is the next 5 years that I should or my audience should be looking out for you?
Oh wow, you're asking me for a 5-year plan. So it normally takes me, I would say, 6 to 8 months to write a book.
Okay.
So I think I have, quite a few lined up, and I haven't really thought of or planned that much ahead because I started the books for my kids. So I think one of the things that I certainly want to do is follow the ages. So when I started it, they were 1 and 3. Now they're 11 and 13. So one of the things that has been on my mind is the Mahabharata. I always wanted to tell them Mahabharata, in my way. And as you know, Mahabharata has so many adult topics.
Sure.
Um, I think that's something that I'm looking forward to uh, kind of interpreting in my own way and telling them and probably writing about it.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough topic, honestly, and I'm excited that how you are gonna twist it and tell the story to the kids also at the same time. I mean, your books is all about kids, but I think it's also for the adults also. But how to
Actually,
explain?
it is not for the adults.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems
Sorry, please go ahead.
no, no, no. So it seems like I should subscribe to your books and get your books too.
I hope you will.
Yes, yes, of course, definitely, definitely. So, any last words that do you have for Back to Basics?
One of the things I think the best thing we can do to bond with our children and also to give them a lifelong gift is to read to them. So this is really for all the parents who have young kids and who have even older kids. I would just say read, read, read as much as you can with them. My first memories and my fondest memories with my mother are sitting on her lap and her reading, a book by Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who.
Yeah,
And I think my love of reading actually started from there in the sense I was really made a reader on the lap of my mother because I love listening to stories, and she was a librarian, so I spent many a summer holidays in a library, and I think they're inexpensive and effective babysitters.
yeah,
So I really got the love of reading, and I think it's been a gift because you can travel with a book. It's such a rich interest to have,
yeah,
and it fulfills your life. So I think that's one thing I'd like to tell the listeners is read, read, read as much with them, read in front of them, fill your house with books, and reading really takes you places.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on my show and making my show a little brighter, and
Oh,
hopefully
thank you,
we'll
Girish.
connect even after the show because it seems like I want to pick your brain with all these different stories, and maybe I want to give some 2 cents into that book also at the same time.
Of course, and it's really been a pleasure sharing my journey with you. Thank you
Yeah,
for inviting.
absolutely. Bankit, thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you, Girish.
So, guys, today we spoke with an author. We talked about the mythology and the storytelling, how to tell the storytelling. It is a very tough topic to talk about, but how simple can we make it? That's the key, and that's what we did here. So, guys, as always, there is a quote of the day. The quote of the day is mythology is a subjective truth. Every culture images life a certain way. So, just like what I said, just make it very simple, very basic, and make sure that we resonate with these stories, these history stories, these fairy tale stories, and that's what we did. So guys, as always, remember, everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, keep on subscribing me, good comments, bad comments, either way, it will make my show stronger. I'll give you great content, great guest, and obviously great host. So guys, take care, God bless, see you next week. God bless. Next week's episode on Back to Basics.
From Mount Sinai back to Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and it was two Egyptian men, and they got into a conversation. Why do you support Israel? Why does America support Israel? And I had a whole conversation about the Society of America and how the majority of Americans have no idea about the politics over there.
Yeah,
They're more worried about what they're going to buy on Amazon.
that's right. That's right.
And so we don't even think about it. So whereas for you, it's right here and it's personal because it's every day you're living that.
Yeah.
We're so far away. It's so an interesting thing. So